Okay, so good evening, everybody. And I was just hearing about all the activities of this center. And so I'm very impressed that you have so many teachings and retreats and other activities. So it sounds like you're studying very hard. And I was asked to talk tonight about emptiness, which is a really difficult topic, but I'll do my best. I hope not to make everybody confused. But since it's a very kind of precious and important topic, then it's important that we have a good motivation for being here and listening to this talk and engaging in this exploration of this topic. So let's begin with a few minutes of meditation just to settle down our body and our mind and really try to ensure we are in a good state of mind. So make yourselves comfortable, sit comfortably. Try to be relaxed. If there's any tension anywhere in your body, in any part of your body, see if you can let it go. You can imagine that it melts and flows out of you, drains out of your body and sinks down into the earth below. So try to let go of all the tension in your body. And if you can't let go of all of it, do the best you can. And then try to relax your mind. That means letting go of or putting aside any thoughts there may be in your mind, such as thoughts of the past, things that you did today or yesterday or any time in the past. Also thoughts of the future, plans for later tonight, tomorrow, or any time in the future. So the past is over, the future isn't yet here. So try to just let your mind be here in the present place and present moment. Being aware of the breathing, the breath flowing in and going out, helps to bring the mind into the present because our breath is in the present. So just be aware of the gentle, natural rhythm of the breathing, the breath flowing in and flowing out. Let your mind be vast and clear like the sky. Understand that thoughts and memories and mental images, emotions are similar to clouds that pass through the sky. They are not permanent. They are transitory. They come, they go. So just let thoughts, memories, other experiences come and go. Try not to follow them, get caught up in them, be distracted by them. Instead, keep coming back to the breath, back to the here and now. So now let's take a few more minutes to generate a really positive, altruistic motivation for being here. So we're looking here tonight at the topic of emptiness, which was taught by the Buddha. And when the Buddha taught, his motivation was always compassionate. He had no self-interest at all. His only concern was for others. He understood the suffering of sentient beings, and he was completely moved by compassion for all sentient beings, wishing all of us to be free of our suffering and to find real, long-lasting peace and happiness, especially that of enlightenment. So that was the Buddha's motivation for teaching. And as we listen to and think about and meditate on the Buddha's teachings, it's good to try to have that same intention, that same motivation in our minds. Not just seeking our own happiness and any kind of mundane gain or goals, but instead seeking the happiness and welfare of all living beings, wishing to bring peace and happiness and freedom from suffering to all living beings. So we'll do some more meditation later. I would like to talk a little bit first, explain the subject. How many of you have heard of emptiness before? Is there anybody who never heard of emptiness, never heard any teaching on emptiness? So I guess you all know it very well. It's a very difficult topic. And it's good to keep hearing teachings on it again and again, and also read, study, think about it, discuss with Dharma friends, meditate on it. It's a long process to really get to an understanding of emptiness. But it's worth the effort because according to the teachings, emptiness is like the key to liberation from suffering. Not so much emptiness itself, but the understanding of emptiness. We need to understand emptiness. We need to realize emptiness in order to liberate ourselves, free ourselves from the root causes of suffering, which lie within our mind. All the disturbing emotions like greed and hatred and jealousy and pride. And especially ignorance. Ignorance is the root of all suffering, the root of all problems. And so as long as that is still present in our mind, then there will continue to be suffering. We won't be able to be liberated from suffering. So that's the main thing we need to eliminate, ignorance. And the only way to eliminate ignorance is to understand emptiness. Understanding emptiness is like the exact opposite to ignorance. Those two states of mind are totally opposite to each other. So that's like the remedy or the medicine that cures us of ignorance. So that's why it's such an important topic. And there are different ways of talking about or explaining emptiness. Within Buddhism, not all Buddhists think the same way or explain things in the same way. There are actually different schools of philosophy. You've probably heard about that, those of you who are studying with Geshe Damdul and so on. I'm not going to go into that. It's a complicated topic. But of the different schools of philosophy, the one that is preferred by most Tibetan teachers and schools is the Madhyamika tradition. So Madhyamika means middle way. It's the middle way school. And it's based on the Buddha's teachings, especially his teachings contained in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, the Prajnaparamita Sutras. So those are given during the Buddha's lifetime. But the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, there's actually many of those, not just one. But you're probably familiar with the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra is one of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. It's one of the shorter ones. Others are very, very, very long. Another Perfection of Wisdom Sutra is the Diamond Cutter Sutra, or the Vajra Cutter Sutra, which is also quite popular in the Chinese traditions. You might be familiar with that as well. So those are examples of Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. But if you've ever read them, you can see they're not so easy to understand what is going on. What is the Buddha talking about there? So they're difficult. It's difficult to understand the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. So 400 years after the Buddha, there was a great Indian master named Nagarjuna, and he wrote a number of texts explaining the main topic of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, which is wisdom, the wisdom realizing emptiness. So that's the beginning of the Madhyamika school. The Madhyamika school traces its history to Nagarjuna, the texts of Nagarjuna. Also within Madhyamika, there are two divisions which sort of arose later after Nagarjuna. But of those two divisions, which are called Svatantrika and Prasangika, the one preferred by Tibetans, at least most Tibetans, as far as I know, is the Prasangika, which means consequentialists. But don't ask me to explain that. That's too complicated. So just stick with the term Prasangika. Madhyamika Prasangika. So since that's the school that most Tibetan teachers, especially in the Gelugpa tradition, favor, they consider that is the most correct, the most accurate, then that's the one we mainly study. So that's what I'm going to be talking about tonight, how they explain emptiness. But I'm just trying to make the point that this term emptiness can have different meanings in different schools. For example, there's another school called the Chittamatra, or the mind-only school. You may have heard of that. I think it's quite popular in the Chinese and Japanese traditions, like in Zen. So they may follow the Chittamatra school. So in that school, they also use the term emptiness, but what they mean by emptiness is something different. So I'm not going to go into that, but just to let you know, there are different ways of explaining the term emptiness. So in case you get together with somebody else and you're talking about emptiness and they may be talking about emptiness, you've got to make sure you're coming from the same school. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with a lot of confusion. Yeah. Okay, so according to the Madhyamika Prasangika, the middle way consequentialist school, the meaning of emptiness is it's the lack or the absence of inherent existence. Inherent existence. And then there's different synonyms or alternate terms for inherent existence, such as independent existence, objective existence, self-existence. There's a whole 17 at least different terms that have the same meaning, that are synonymous with this term. But we have to understand what that means. What is the meaning of inherent existence? Because that's what things are empty of. Okay? So according to this school, all phenomena, whatever exists, and that includes each one of us and everything about us, our body, our mind, all of our possessions, our friends, our enemies, all the other people, all the other human beings, all the other living beings in the world and in the universe, and all the material things, material phenomena, like this building and everything in the building, all the other buildings, the cars, the roads, so all the human-made things on this planet, plus all the natural things like trees and grass and mountains and rivers and so on, and the planet itself, and everything, whatever exists, including Buddha and enlightenment and nirvana. So everything in samsara, cyclic existence, plus everything beyond samsara, in nirvana and enlightenment, all of these things have emptiness as their true nature, their actual way of existing. Okay, so the way everything exists in reality, in actuality, is that everything is empty of inherent existence. And please understand that the meaning of emptiness, there's confusion. Sometimes people think emptiness means nothingness. It sounds like that, doesn't it? It sounds like when you say everything is empty, that means everything doesn't exist. That's wrong. That's a misunderstanding. So please, if you have that idea, then get rid of it. It's not true. It's not correct. And it's even dangerous. It's actually dangerous to think that way. You can get yourself into big trouble, mentally ill. Yeah, if you really think, oh, nothing exists, nothing exists, nothing exists, you could end up in a mental hospital. But another danger is that you might lose touch with conventional reality, such as karma, the law of cause and effect. Okay, so actually, in Buddhism, especially in this school, they talk about two levels of truth, two levels of reality. One is the ultimate, and the other is the conventional. So the ultimate level of reality, or ultimate truth, is emptiness, emptiness of inherent existence. And then there's the conventional level of things, conventional truth, and that includes everything else, everything other than emptiness. So whatever isn't emptiness is a conventional truth. Whatever exists that's not emptiness is a conventional truth. So that means our bodies, our minds, ourselves as persons, all other people and beings, and again, all those other phenomena. So all of these things are conventional truths, and they do exist. Okay, they do exist. But the ultimate truth, or the ultimate reality, the ultimate way all of these things exist is that they are empty. Empty of inherent existence. And these two levels of truth are actually totally compatible and not contradictory. Like, for example, this book, okay, this is an example of a conventional truth. It's a conventional truth. It does exist. It's made of pieces of paper and ink and glue and so on. But with it, as a kind of quality of it, is emptiness. Emptiness is like a quality of the book. Emptiness of existing inherently. It's the true nature, the ultimate nature, the real nature, the real way the book exists is emptiness. So there's two things there. There's the book itself, which is a conventional truth, and there's the emptiness of the book, which is the ultimate truth. And these two things are totally compatible. They're not enemies. They don't knock each other out. They don't get into fights. They're totally non-contradictory. They exist together in a totally harmonious way. Okay? So this is very much emphasized. It's not so easy to understand, but it's very important to understand it, that conventional truths and ultimate truths exist together, side by side, or maybe not even side by side, but more like two aspects of the same thing. It's like we say, our hand has two sides, the front and the back, or the palm and the back, okay? And the two sides of our hand, exist together. They can't really be separated. Okay? So they're just two aspects of the hand. Or we also say two sides of a coin. There's always two sides of a coin. And they exist together and they can't be separated. So in a similar way, conventional truths and ultimate truths are like that, like two sides of a coin, two sides of a hand. They exist together in an inseparable way. So I'm just emphasizing that because it is important that when you understand emptiness correctly, you do not deny or refute conventional truth. You still understand that things do exist conventionally. Okay, so the book, the table, my body, mind, myself as a person, all of these things do exist. They just don't exist in the way we normally perceive them. They are empty of a certain way of existing that our mind projects onto them. So that's the meaning of emptiness. Emptiness doesn't mean nothingness. It means that things do exist, but they just don't exist the way we normally think. They're empty of our usual way of seeing things, which is actually mistaken or wrong. So it's like our mind projects a certain way of existing onto things, which in fact isn't there, which things are actually empty of. And so the process of understanding emptiness is to recognize the false or the mistaken way that our mind sees things, and then refute that. Realize that that mode of existence, that way of existing is impossible. It simply cannot exist. It's an impossible way of existing. And then we clear that away and we're able to see things in the correct way as they do exist. So the one reason it's said to be so difficult to understand emptiness is because it's totally opposite to our usual way of seeing things, our usual way of thinking, that has been part of our mind forever. Like according to Buddhism, our mind didn't just start existing in this lifetime when our body did. Our body started off in our mother's womb, a certain number of years ago, and then it started to grow and became the body that we have now. But our mind didn't start existing then. Our mind existed before. In fact, Buddhism says our mind is without beginning. It didn't have a beginning point. It's been there forever. That's another difficult thing to understand. But according to Buddhism, our mind has always been existing, and all along we've had ignorance in our mind. Ignorance has been a part of our mind forever. That means our mind has always been seeing things in a mistaken way. We've never seen things correctly. It's not that once upon a time, long ago, we were enlightened. Our mind was totally pure, totally clear. We saw everything correctly the way that they exist. And then something happened. Something went wrong. We fell from that wonderful state of enlightenment and then fell into darkness of ignorance. So it's not like that. Some people think that way, but it's not like that. Our mind has never been enlightened. Our mind has never been free of ignorance. So ignorance has always been there in our mind, influencing our mind, causing us to see things in a mistaken way. So that's why it's so hard to realize emptiness, because we are just so habituated, addicted to a wrong way of seeing things. And it's very hard to change that, just like, any other kind of addiction that you might have, something you've been doing for years and years and years and years. If you want to try to change that, stop that, it's very hard, right? Very hard to go against that very deep, long-term habit. So that's why it's not easy to understand emptiness. We're going against a habit that's been in our mind forever. I mean, you can't even count how many years that, it's been there. Really, really long. But I'm not saying that to discourage you, because it is possible. The Buddha did it, and many other beings followed in the Buddha's footsteps, and they were able to see the true nature of things and clear up their ignorance and reach enlightenment. So we can do it too. But I'm just trying to emphasize that it's not that easy. Yeah, so even if you're a really intelligent person, even if you've had a fantastic education, you may have a PhD or 2 or 3 PhDs, you may have an incredible mind, but even with that kind of mind, it can still be very difficult to understand emptiness. So people sometimes get discouraged, they've studied a lot, they're very intelligent, they have a high degree, but then when it comes to understanding emptiness, they get really frustrated. I don't get it. I don't understand it. Why not? They want to be able to understand it really quickly, right away. But it's not that easy to do. And in fact, what they say is that it's not enough just to listen to teachings and read and think about it and so on. We also need to do other kinds of practices, like complementary practices for purification and accumulation of merit. This is what the monks in the monasteries do. They don't just study, but they get up early in the morning and they do lots of prayers, recitations of prayers and mantras. They do prostrations to purify. So we need to do that as well, to clear away or purify the negative energy, the negative habits of the mind that are in our way of seeing the true nature of things. And we also need to build up the positive energy, well, like they call it merit, accumulation of merit. That's like positive energy that enables our mind to get realizations more quickly. So in addition to studying and reading and reflecting and meditating, we also need to do those other practices if we really want to be successful in understanding emptiness. Okay, so what we're trying to overcome in our mind is ignorance. And there are different kinds of ignorance, but we are trying to overcome a certain type of ignorance, which isn't just not knowing things. The word ignorance sometimes means not knowing. Like I'm ignorant of Chinese. I don't know Chinese. I may know one or two words like xie xie, but I'm very ignorant when it comes to Chinese. Okay, so that means I just don't know Chinese. Okay? So all of us have ignorance about certain things, certain languages we don't know, certain subjects we've never studied, certain skills we don't have, and so on. So that's one kind of ignorance. One meaning of ignorance is just not knowing something. But there's another kind of ignorance which is more than just not knowing something, but it's an opposite way of thinking than the way things are. So let's say, for example, this is an example that it's not mine, but somebody else. Let's say the population of Singapore. Okay, there is a certain figure of how many people live in Singapore. So let's say I'm ignorant of that. I don't know how many people there are in Singapore. Okay, I really have no idea. If somebody asks me, I would have to say, I don't know. So that's one kind of ignorance, just simple not knowing. But let's say there's a person who not only doesn't know the population of Singapore, but thinks they do, but it's totally off. Like maybe they think there's 20 million people. I'm sure that's wrong, right? At least now. maybe in a few years it'll be 20 million, but right now that's way off the mark. Okay, but let's say there's a person who is convinced that there are 20 million people living in Singapore, and they're really attached to that. They, strongly believe that. So that's a different kind of ignorance, because that person not only doesn't know the right information, but has a totally wrong idea about things, and they cling to it very, very, very tightly. Okay, so that's a more kind of messy, problematic kind of ignorance than just simply not knowing. So that's the kind of ignorance we have with regard to the true nature of things. So our ignorance about the true nature of things isn't simply we don't know, but it's more complex. We actually think we know the reality of things. We think we see things correctly, but what we think is actually completely wrong. And yet we think we don't know that, and we cling to it. We're very, very, very attached to our view of things, and clinging to our view of things, and thinking we see things correctly. So then it's more problematic, right? More difficult to deal with. But again, not impossible. So this type of ignorance we have that we need to clear up causes us to see things in a mistaken way, a false way. So that's what is called inherent existence. Now, this term inherent existence, I've always found it kind of problematic. It's not so easy to understand. But it's explained as we see things as if they have a real way of existing all on their own, from their own side, objectively, out there, totally independent of everything else or anything else. And this isn't something we think deliberately or consciously, but rather it's something instinctive, it's something inborn. Because they say we're actually born with this, right from the time we come out of the womb, and even when we're still in the womb, even in the womb, the mind is still thinking this way, seeing things this way. The baby in the womb probably has some basic primitive sense of I am this creature inside this womb. And even at that time, they have a sense of their I being inherently existing, objectively existing, real, existing on its own. Okay? So it's something we're born with because we had it in past lives. We've carried it from one life to the next, right up until the present life. So that way of seeing things, ourself, our body, our mind, other people, their bodies and minds, other things, all things that appear to us. So it really pervades all of our experiences, the totality of our experiences. So this way of seeing things is actually false or wrong or mistaken. Things don't exist that way. Things are empty of existing that way. So that's the meaning of emptiness. So let's just take an example. So this object we call a book. We'll stick to English for now. In Chinese or other languages you have other names, but I think we all speak English here, so we call this a book. So when we see an object like this sitting on a table or on a shelf, we automatically think book. It's a book. And when we see it and think it's a book, the way our mind perceives it, conceives of it, experiences it, it seems as if book is something real existing within this collection of parts. It's actually a collection of different parts, okay? It's different pieces of paper printed with ink, put together with glue so they stay together. Okay, so that's actually what's actually there. But we don't see the book as it really is, as it actually is, and instead we see the book as if book is a real thing that could be found when we look among the parts. Again, this isn't something we deliberately think or consciously think, it's more just an instinctive, intuitive kind of feeling we have, a reaction that we have. Book seems to be a real thing existing on its own, objectively, independently, standalone, autonomously. So those are the kind of words that are used to describe this false way that we see things, the false mode of existence that our mind projects. Because actually the book doesn't exist that way, but this is projected by our mind. Our mind projects this mode of existence onto what's actually here. So if that mode of existence were true, if it did exist that way, we should be able to find this real, inherently existing book. So this is a good thing to do. It's really helpful. I'm just going to go through it quickly now, but it's good if you do this on your own. You can use this or any other object. But really think about what the object is made of. Okay, so there's pieces of paper. And of course, paper, as we know, comes from trees. Okay, didn't always exist like this, but once upon a time this was part of a tree growing in the forest. And then of course the tree itself came from the seed and water and soil and sunshine and so many causes and conditions for the tree to grow. Then the tree was cut down and brought to a lumber mill or a paper mill. I'm not sure exactly how they do it, but anyway, somehow they transform the wood of the tree into paper. Okay, so then there's, a few hundred pieces of paper in here, and on top of the paper there's ink, and ink was invented in China, right? Where does ink? What's ink? Is it a natural material or where does it come from? You guys should know. You're Chinese. Anyway, there's some kind of process for creating ink, okay? And then ink, that material, that substance, that black liquid, is printed onto the paper in certain forms of letters. Okay? In this case, English letters, Roman letters. Okay? So that's basically what's here. There's a certain number of pieces of paper printed with ink, and then they use some substance like glue to keep it all together, stick all the pages together, and then we have a book. Okay? So there's many different parts here, many different individual parts or components. And if we go through the parts one by one, each page, each letter on each page, will we be able to find a book? Can we find any part of this that we can point to and say that's a book? There's no book. Right. So if we go through, it takes time. I'm not going to do that now. But like I say, it is a good exercise to do one day when you have time, to really just think about. You don't have to physically take it apart, but you can just mentally go through the parts one by one and try to find a book. And guess what? You will not find a book. Okay? None of these parts that make up the book is a book. Okay? That's not too difficult to understand, right? And yet, our feeling, our kind of gut level, instinctive, intuitive feeling is that there is a book here. There is a real book here. And yet, when we try to find it, try to point to what the book is, we cannot do that. We cannot point to anything that is a book. So doing that gives you a sense of emptiness. It seems like there's a real book there, but when you look for it, you examine it, you try to find it, you cannot find it. Okay? The book is actually empty. But does that mean there's no book? Book doesn't exist? You paid a lot of money for this book. You don't want to pay $20 for nothing, right? So, again, emptiness doesn't mean nothingness. It doesn't mean the book isn't there. The book doesn't exist. It does. You can hold it in your hand, you can look at it, you can read it, you can get some knowledge, some understanding by reading this book. So the book does exist conventionally. We say conventionally there is a book, but ultimately, on the ultimate level, the book is empty of existing inherently or independently as a real, findable, objectively existing, autonomous thing that we can find, that we can point to, we can put our finger on. So how does the book exist? According to the Prasangika school, they say it exists by being merely labeled, merely named. Okay? We just give the name or the word, the title, the term book onto a collection of parts, none of which is a book. So all the parts of the book, we could say, are non-books. Do you agree? There's a whole bunch of non-books here, a whole pile, a whole collection of non-books, things which aren't books. And then on top of that, or in relation to that, we say book. We call it book. So book is just named, just labeled. Okay? But not findable when you search for it. So this gives you some idea of emptiness, some understanding of emptiness. But it's only when you really go through this process. First of all, you get a sense of how the book seems so real, like it's really there on the table or in your hands, a real book. And then you try to find it. You look for it, and you don't find it. You don't find that real book. So that's when you get a sense of emptiness. So according to Madhyamika, Prasangika, they say everything is like that. I'm using the book as an example, but the same is true for everything else. Each one of us, we call ourselves I, right? We use the word I to refer to ourselves, or we also have a name given by our parents. Okay, I am Sangye Khadro, although that's not the name my parents gave me. That's the name my Lama gave me when I took refuge. My parents gave me Kathleen. That was the name they gave me. Okay, so Kathleen or Kathy, my nickname. Okay, so this is just a name, just a series of sounds, letters, words. So there's a name or a term given to a collection of parts, in our case, body and mind. And those in turn are collections of parts. Our body is made up of many, many, many parts, especially if we consider the very tiny parts like the molecules, atoms, subatomic particles. There's probably zillions of parts making up our body. It's just a mass of physical components, plus a mind, which is also made of parts. It's not just one monolithic, partless thing, but it's a continuum, ever changing. Every moment our mind is changing. It's like a stream of bubble-like mental states, mental experiences that arise and pop, arise and pop, arise and pop, continuously. Okay, so our mind is also made up of parts, changing over time. And even if you analyze one single moment of mind, you can see that's made up of parts. So our mind is also composed of many different parts. So we're just this mass or collection of physical parts and mental parts, changing every moment, never the same from one moment to the next. And on top of this, or in relation to this, we give some name like I, or Sangye Khadro, or Kathleen, or whatever your name is, John, Mary, Joe, Josephine. Okay, we all have our own names. So we are just named, we are just labeled. But when you try to find the I, or whatever your name is, the self, you cannot find it. It cannot be found. It isn't something you can point to, you can pinpoint, you can put your finger on and say, right there, that is me, that is I. Let's do a meditation on this. It's probably better than me just going blah, blah, blah. Okay, so sit comfortably. Try to sit up straight, because that helps your mind to be more clear, awake, alert. And if you are feeling sleepy because you had a long, hard day, then it might be better not to close your eyes all the way, otherwise you might fall asleep. Instead, leave them open a little bit so there's some light coming in. And then you can have your eyes looking down, just onto your lap or the floor in front of you. That can help you stay awake. So once again, let your body relax, be free of tension. Let your mind relax, be free of other kinds of thoughts. Just let your mind be right here in the present place, present moment. Now very carefully, gently, like a photographer trying to take a picture of an animal in the wild, wanting to take that picture without scaring the animal away. So in the same kind of way, see if you can catch a glimpse of your sense of I, sense of self, me. I am sitting in this room in the Tibetan Buddhist Center, listening to this talk, participating in this session. Right now, doing meditation. So there's a sense of an I who is here, now, doing what we're doing. So what is that I? Does it seem to be something existing on its own, objectively, a real thing somewhere inside of you, as opposed to just something created by your mind, something imaginary, not really there? So if you've already heard teachings on emptiness, selflessness, you might think, oh yeah, I know there's no real I. I doesn't really exist the way it appears. But then when things happen in our life, for example, somebody insults us or wrongly accuses us of something or blames us, and we get very upset, angry, hurt. So at that time, we do have a sense of a real I. The sense of I comes up very strongly. Feeling angry or indignant, hurt, wanting to defend ourselves, wanting to get back at this person. So at times of strong emotion, anger, fear, anxiety, attachment, excitement, our sense of I becomes very vivid, very clear. It seems to really be there, existing on its own, objectively. But if that's true, if there really is such a I, we should be able to find it when we look for it. So let's start by looking through our body. And just do that on your own. You can think about what your body is made of, the different parts of your body, like the organs, skin, blood vessels, bones, cells, atoms. So just see if you can find any part of your body that you can point to and say, that is me, that is the I. So some of you might think that a part of your body is your I. For example, many people think their brain is their I. They identify with their brain. Perhaps because of learning from Western science that the brain is the center of our conscious experiences, and it's sort of the main controller of all the different functions in the body. So many people identify with their brain. So if you do have such an idea that my brain is me, then check again. For example, when we stand in front of a mirror looking at our reflection, and we might have thoughts like, I look pretty good today, or I look pretty awful today, or I'm fat, or I'm thin, or I'm attractive, or I'm ugly. So we have these kind of thoughts about ourselves looking at our reflection in the mirror. But what is it we see in the mirror? Do we see our brain in the mirror? Are we looking at our brain and thinking, I look good or I don't look good? And also, we might find ourselves saying things like, my brain. So when we make such a statement, we are saying that there is an I who is the owner of the brain. The brain is a possession of the I. So aren't we saying that I is something other than the brain? So then, probably many people identify more with the mind rather than the body. So let's explore that possibility. Is our mind our I? Am I my mind? So our mind is also something that's made of parts, not just one whole thing. Our mind is like a stream, ever-changing, made up of different experiences. Each moment, there are different experiences that arise and then pass. They last only a moment and then they pass, and the next one arises and passes. So our mind is constantly changing. It's never the same from one moment to the next. And this stream is made up of our thoughts, our emotions, our memories, our perceptions, like seeing, hearing, and so forth. And then when we're asleep at night, it's made up of dreams or just deep unconsciousness. So the mind is not a single thing, but a multiple thing, made of many, many parts, different mental states arising and passing. So if you do think your I is in your mind or is your mind, then investigate that more closely. Can you point to any one part of your mind as being your I? So if we do point to any one part of the mind, any one experience in the mind as being I, then remember that part of the mind only lasts a moment and then it's gone. It goes out of existence and the next one arises. So is that really how you see your I? Something that's there one moment, gone the next, constantly changing? Also, we might find ourselves saying things like my mind, my thoughts, my feelings. So aren't we saying that I is something separate from the mind, like the owner of the mind, and the mind is that which is owned, a possession? So if you do have the idea that the I is something separate from the body, separate from the mind, something that owns the body and the mind, as in my body, my mind, then what is it? Is there something you can point to as being that I, that owner of the body and mind? What kind of phenomena is it? Where can it be found? So in case any of you feels, oh, maybe I don't exist, maybe there is no me, no I, because when I try to find the I can't find anything there. So this isn't the right conclusion. We shouldn't end up thinking I don't exist at all. We do exist. We do have a body and a mind. We work, we eat, we sleep, we walk, we think, we meditate. And eventually, one day, if we follow the path, we'll become enlightened, we'll become Buddhas. So it's not that we don't exist. It's not that there's nothing, nobody at all. But rather, we do exist, just not the way we normally think. We don't exist as something real, solid, inherently or objectively existing, something findable we can point to, that's I, that's me. Instead, the way we exist is just this collection of physical and mental parts, body and mind, changing all the time, that we call I, or whatever our name is. So the I is merely labeled, merely named, merely imputed on top of or in relation to this collection of physical and mental components, none of which is an I. So our body and mind are empty of a real, inherently existing I. So we were just doing this meditation in relation to our own self or I, but the same meditation could be done with any object, and another person or an inanimate object. Also Buddha. Actually, somebody wrote down a question. Wanted me to talk about emptiness of the Buddha. The emptiness of the Buddha. Well, it's the same. The Buddha, if we talk about the person Buddha, like Shakyamuni Buddha, who lived in the world 2,500 years ago and walked around, became enlightened and then taught, and so on and so on. So it's the same as with ourself. You know, the Buddha was made of body and mind, physical and mental parts, physical and mental components. Of course, the Buddha's mind is different than our mind. Buddha's mind is totally free of all the disturbing emotions, ignorance, and so on and so forth. But there's still a mind there. Totally pure and totally enlightened mind, but it's still a mind like our mind. So in relation to that collection of body and mind, or 5 aggregates, as the usual Buddhist explanation is, so in relation to that, we give the name or the term Buddha. So Buddha is merely labeled, merely named in relation to the aggregates, the body and mind of a Buddha. So just so we could meditate, you know, the same way we did with ourselves, we could meditate on another person, an ordinary person, or with the Buddha. Does that make sense? And actually there's a verse, I brought this book along because this is a really wonderful book if you want to know more about emptiness. It's called How to See Yourself as You Really Are. And it's teachings by the Dalai Lama. He actually gave teachings on the middle-length Lamrim of Lama Tsongkhapa, the emptiness section of that text. And then Jeffrey Hopkins, who's an American scholar, probably the number one authority on the topic of emptiness. So he edited the teachings into relatively simple language, much simpler than some of the books, you know, with really complicated terminology and so on. So it's kind of everyday language, talking about emptiness. So it's a great book if you do want to know more about emptiness. So in this book, he quotes this verse from Nagarjuna's text, the fundamental treatise on the middle ways. That's the most important text by Nagarjuna that inaugurated the Madhyamika school of philosophy. And so one verse in that text, he's sort of analyzing the Buddha to see if the Buddha exists inherently or not. So I'll read that. He says, the Buddha is not his mind-body complex, collection of body and mind. So the mind-body complex itself isn't the Buddha. And he is not other than his mind-body complex, meaning we also cannot find the Buddha anywhere else besides his mind-body complex. You can't find, like, the Buddha's mind-body is over here, and then we can find the Buddha over here, right? That doesn't work. The mind-body complex is not in him. It's not that the Buddha is something big, and then inside of the Buddha we find his mind-body complex. Yeah? In the same way that you find a person inside of a house. A house is this big, big thing, and then inside the house you find the person. So we cannot find the Buddha as some big thing inside of which is his mind-body complex. And also the opposite. He is not in it. Meaning, it's not that the mind-body complex is the big thing, and then inside of that we can find this little Buddha, you know. And he does not possess it, meaning Buddha is not the owner or the possessor of his mind-body complex, like a separate thing. Like we were doing that in our investigation. Can we find the I as something that's the owner of our body and mind? Some other thing outside of our body and mind that owns our body and mind? So what Buddha is there? So there's actually 5 things there, 5 different possibilities. The Buddha is the body and mind. The Buddha is other than the body and mind, outside of the body and mind. The mind-body complex is inside of him, or he is inside of it, or he is the possessor of it. So there's 5 different possibilities of looking for the Buddha, trying to find the Buddha. And Nagarjuna's conclusion is, you search through those 5 possibilities and you cannot find the Buddha in any of them. Okay? So that's a way of analyzing the Buddha to see if the Buddha exists inherently. Because again, the idea is, if something did exist inherently, if something was inherently existing, which is the opposite of emptiness, we should be able to find it. Yeah, it should be findable. We can find that thing existing on its own, independently, real, autonomous. So you look in all these different places or different possibilities, and you can't find it, then the conclusion is it's not there. It's empty of existing inherently. So on top of these 5 things, Chandrakirti, who came later after the Buddha, after the Buddha, yeah, but also after Nagarjuna, he's another great Indian master, and he wrote a text called the Madhyamika Vitara, or the supplement to the Middle Way. He added 2 more possibilities to this. 2 more places where you could look. One is the collection of all the parts, and the other is the shape. Okay, so it's called a 7-point method, 7-point analysis of Chandrakirti. 7 different places, 7 different possibilities. So there's lots of different ways of investigating, analyzing, to check to see if things exist inherently or not. So I'm sure that when you're studying with Geshe Dorje Damdol, he will explain these if he hasn't already. And hopefully you'll have a chance to meditate on them as well. We have a little bit of time left, so I thought if anyone has a question you'd like to ask.
Hi, Venerable. I'm just kind of struck by how, since emptiness is so essential to the Buddhist conception of freedom from suffering, right, and the path to enlightenment, how then, Buddhist iconography, as you can see all around you, is so integral to the spiritual tradition, or at least some schools. So I'm just trying to reconcile that emphasis on form, and sometimes even the practices of offering food or paper money, and I mean, it's kind of projecting, or rather modeling, our own existence and the way we relate to things in the conventional reality. So how do these practices and iconography and things like that help believers or followers to get to the stage of ultimate reality? Isn't it more of an extra, I wouldn't say obstacle, but
more things
more things to overcome,
to grasp that is inherently existing? Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just answering from my thoughts. Okay, I haven't heard a Lama give an answer to that before, but because we do have bodies, okay? We are human beings, living beings. We have bodies, we have minds, so we do live in a physical realm, a physical domain, and we'll probably do so for a long time to come. So we can't just immediately become formless, empty of form. So while we do live with form and surrounded by form and so forth, and it's skillful to be able to use form to help us in our practice. So, like you mentioned, offerings. So making offerings is actually one of the best ways of accumulating merit. And we do need to accumulate merit. I think of merit as like fuel. We have our body and our mind, our aggregates, which are a bit like a car. A car can go somewhere, get you somewhere, but if there's no fuel, it won't be able to move. So I think of merit, this is just my own analogy, but it helps me. Merit is like positive energy that will enable this body and mind to move in the direction of enlightenment or nirvana or whatever. So we don't just get stuck and stay where we are. We need this positive energy to get moving. So we do that by doing virtuous actions, such as making offerings, reciting prayers. And when we recite prayers, it's useful to have, objects, Buddha images, or at least visualized images of the Buddha in relation to which we are directing our prayers. It just gives a lot more inspiration to the mind and meaning to our prayers and so forth. So I think of all these images and so forth as like aids for our practice, to give us inspiration and the opportunities. Because they say, just looking at images of Buddhas and making offerings, lights and incense and so forth creates so much merit. It really helps us, our mind, to progress towards enlightenment. But ideally, if we're really serious about practicing and we want to practice in a complete way, when we do, look at pictures or visualize images of Buddha, make offerings and so forth, we should remember their emptiness, Like they say, a bodhisattva, when a bodhisattva is practicing, a bodhisattva also needs to accumulate merit. And one of the practices, like the first of the 6 perfections, is the practice of generosity or giving. So when a bodhisattva is giving, they need to think, the I who is giving is empty of inherent existence. This food that I'm giving is empty of inherent existence. The recipient, whether it's a sentient being or the Buddha, is also empty of inherent existence. So they call that the circle of the 3, or the 3 spheres. The subject, the object, the action, or the substance. All elements of this practice are empty of inherent existence. So this is how a bodhisattva practices. So they're practicing wisdom and method together. Wisdom meaning the understanding of emptiness, and method is a term for the other side of the path, the compassion, the accumulation of merit, and so on. So they need both sides of the path, not only wisdom, but they also need the method side to go all the way to enlightenment. So for the method side of the path, then it is useful to have images of the Buddha, making offerings and so forth. Does that help?
Only if both of these two come together.
Well, even if you don't have an understanding of emptiness, like, a lot of people, for example, in Buddhist countries, they're born into Buddhist families, and maybe they haven't had so much education in Buddhism, but they still have a lot of faith. They go to the temples, they pray, they make, offer incense and so forth. So, even if they don't have any idea about emptiness, but still they are creating merit, they're accumulating merit. Okay, and that hopefully, of course they have to do other things as well, but eventually that will become a cause for them to be in better situation where they can study, learn, practice, and do all the right things they need to reach enlightenment. Because they say, in fact, this is what they say in our tradition, they talk about the power of the object. There are powerful objects such as images of the Buddha or actual Buddhas or spiritual teachers. These are holy objects. So anything that's done in relation to a holy object becomes a cause for enlightenment. Even if you're ignorant, even if you have no idea what's going on, but it's the power of the object. That object is so powerful that, they say even if you get angry, you look at the picture of the Dalai Lama and you get angry. But because of the power of the object, that object is so powerful, it will still become a cause for your eventual attainment of enlightenment. So that's why I say, even in a state of ignorance or even in a state of anger, anything done in relation to holy objects, powerful objects, does become a cause for enlightenment. But of course, it is best, it is most ideal if we do have all the elements of the paths, not just compassion, but also wisdom. Any other questions?
Any questions from upstairs? No. I think we're all good on the second floor.
Is it okay? Upstairs? Okay. Venerable, thank you for the enlightening teachings. I'm just wondering about the meditation on emptiness of emptiness. We can also apply the sevenfold reasoning, right? For emptiness of emptiness. Could you kindly refresh my memory on the sevenfold reasoning, how we use it to analyze emptiness of emptiness? Thank you.
I haven't actually heard that specific thing, the use of the sevenfold reasoning. The sevenfold reasoning they usually use, for example, the chariot, or the bicycle or car or whatever, taking that apart and then applying it to the self, the I. But for emptiness itself, I don't think you could use all seven reasons because, for example, shape wouldn't apply because emptiness doesn't have any shape. So that one wouldn't work. But, usually they say, another method for analyzing to understand emptiness is to look at how things exist dependently. And so there's three ways that things are dependent on causes and conditions. And that also wouldn't apply to emptiness, because emptiness is a permanent phenomenon. It doesn't depend on causes and conditions. Parts, that applies, because emptiness does have parts, which is also kind of tricky. Wait a minute, how can you say emptiness has parts? It's a permanent phenomena. How can you divide it up into parts? So they say the parts of emptiness are all the individual emptinesses, because emptiness isn't just one thing that pervades everything, but rather each individual object, each conventional truth has emptiness as its ultimate nature. So there's the emptiness of me, the emptiness of you. We're 50 people in this room, so there's 50 emptinesses of each one of us. And then we can also talk about the emptiness of all the parts of our body, the emptiness of this finger, the emptiness of this finger, the emptiness of my big toe, the emptiness of all the cells, the emptiness, and so on and so forth. So there's, millions of different emptinesses just in, the body and mind complex of one person. So those are the parts of emptiness. There's all the individual emptinesses. So emptiness has parts. So since it has parts, therefore, it's dependent. It's dependent on its parts, and therefore it's not inherently or independently existing. And also, another way we can see how emptiness is dependent is because it depends on the object that has emptiness as its true nature. Emptiness doesn't exist independent of conventional truths. Okay, so all the conventional truths, the conventional objects, are the bases for emptiness. Okay, so emptiness exists in relation to those things, and therefore there's dependency there. You can't have emptiness just all by itself. Yes, that's another way it's dependent. And then it's also dependent in the third way, dependent on mental labeling. It's just labeled by the mind. We just say emptiness in relation to this absence of inherent existence. So it doesn't exist independent of mental labeling. But it's, to go through all the 7 points, I don't know. I'd have to think about that, and I'm not sure if that would work.
That's one.
Do you think that to help us see emptiness, it will be easier if we start at looking at ourselves, the I, as empty of inherent existence? I mean, would it help to understand emptiness if we work on ourselves and see ourselves as empty, and then we can start seeing emptiness? Or, I mean, but you know what I'm trying to say, right? Do we really just work on ourselves all the time, you know?
Yeah, they do say that in the teachings, that the best place to start looking at emptiness, understanding emptiness, is our own self, our own I. They say it's easier to understand emptiness of the self than it is to understand the emptiness of our aggregates or other things. I have some trouble with that. Many people do as well. Because, I mean, it seems easier to understand a concrete object, like the book or car or the bicycle or something. You can kind of take it apart and see, oh, I cannot find a bicycle when I look among all the different parts. I find it harder with I, because it's more abstract. It's not a physical thing. And also, it feels so real, I mean, you can see easily a bicycle or a book is just made of these physical parts or components. But when it comes to the I feel like I really am here. I really exist, especially when you get very emotional. But then on the other hand, when it does seem so real, that's the best time to look for it. If it really does exist, where is it? How does it exist? Where can it be found? How can I pinpoint it? And when you do that kind of investigation, you can't find it. So maybe that's why it said, it is good to start with the I. And then also, if you can get an understanding of emptiness with regard to yourself, then it's easy to look at other persons or other objects and understand the emptiness of them. But also another reason for starting with the I is because our emotional problems, our attachment, our aversion, our jealousy, all these painful, disturbing emotions that we have are based on our sense of self. So if we can, work on that, at least reduce a strong grasping at I as a real thing, that will have an effect on our disturbing emotions. They will become more subdued as well.
Hi, so it seems that the concept of emptiness is more, it seems to me more of a nature of reality, that if we are trying to attain enlightenment, we would require to understand to truly be enlightened. But considering that if for me myself, I don't expect to be enlightened in my lifetime, that even if things are independent of inherent meaning, but you still can ascribe helpful meaning, like in the example of rituals or offerings, what is the utility of emptiness in my life then? Is it like a checking mechanism to realize that, for example, everything is empty, hence I can let go of things that are unhelpful and then hang on to the things that I ascribe helpful meaning to? Or do I still strive for complete understanding of emptiness with the idea that I'm not probably going to be enlightened and don't need this nature of reality in my lifetime.
You don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, don't completely give up that idea. It's possible. I mean, it's good to think maybe I can get enlightened in this lifetime, but without grasping at that, without being frantic about that and anxious about that and then upset if it doesn't happen. But still think it's possible because we don't know what kind of imprints we have from past lives, yeah? So it's possible. We do have very powerful, highly developed imprints from the past. So you might be enlightened in this lifetime. So I think it's good to have the ambition to reach enlightenment, however long it takes, whenever it's going to happen. I'm going to keep working towards that. And then continue to create the causes, accumulate the causes, which do include understanding emptiness. So it's good to, keep working at learning about, thinking about, meditating on emptiness rather than putting that aside and thinking, oh, well, that's just too hard and I probably won't reach enlightenment anyway this lifetime, so I'm not going to put too much effort into that.
I don't think my question is like to reject emptiness totally, but I think the question is more like, in this lifetime to get closer to enlightenment, is it more useful for me to grasp emptiness totally, or is it more useful for me to use emptiness to grasp onto helpful ascribed meaning that may be inherently meaningless, but in this lifetime will help me get closer to enlightenment? For example, religious activities, offerings, rituals.
I'm not completely sure what you're saying there, but I think what I was saying earlier to her question, the ideal, because even if even someone who's full-time into trying to understand emptiness, they would still engage in other kinds of practices to accumulate merit and do purification, because those are complementary practices, to help the mind, nourish the mind for its understanding of emptiness. So I think, the ideal thing, it may not be possible, but try. The ideal thing would be to work on both. Understanding emptiness, trying to incorporate emptiness into your practice and into your daily life to whatever extent you're able to. Maybe hard to do that, but at least sometimes think about emptiness. And work on the other aspects as well. The prayers, the practices, the devotional side, the ethical side, because that's also essential. Living ethically, that's like an essential, indispensable ground or foundation for our practice, living ethically. Ethical living and kindness to others and so on. So, there's lots of different facets, lots of different aspects of practice, but I think of them as like a diet, it's like we need to have a balanced diet. We need to eat lots of different kinds of food to get the right nourishment for our body. So in a similar way, for our spiritual practice and spiritual development, we need a lot of different components.
Yeah, it's like, when you're trying to understand emptiness, when you're trying to understand emptiness or all that, it's like you're going to drink water, you're only drinking water only, and you're fasting yourself. That way you will never have a chance to get to Nirvana. Okay? Because the way to Nirvana is not about understanding or realization of emptiness, but to work out yourself. Who am I? Who are you and the meaning of it. If you're working on just purely on the emptiness, you'll never get Nirvana. Because I spent 7 years trying to find it. I can't find it. There's no way.
Well, we do need understanding of emptiness, but we do need more than that. We need other things as well. Yeah, that's one part.
But the one question that you want to get to Nirvana is that you ask yourself, who am I? See what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. So we've gone over time now. Very good questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think one session. I think we can't finish emptiness today, so
No.
Venerable will come back to.
One drop in the bucket of emptiness. Yeah.
So Venerable will come back for more
Maybe one day.
teaching.
Yeah.
Okay.
Try.
On behalf of Tibetan.
Oh, can we dedicate first? Can we?
Oh,
make-
yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
So we always dedicate the merit, the positive energy that we create when we come together for talk, for meditation, and so on. So feel that we have done a good thing here tonight. It's been very positive to come here and make the effort to listen and try to understand and meditate on this topic, even if we still feel very confused about it. That's okay. Just making the effort to try to understand emptiness is really, really a good thing to do. And so we have definitely created some merit, good energy, positive energy. And this is the cause of happiness and the cause of spiritual growth along the path to enlightenment. So let's share this merit with others, with the wish that they too can come to understand the path, feel the wish to follow the path, and do the things that will enable them to progress along the path, and in that way quickly reach freedom from suffering and the perfect peace and happiness of enlightenment. Also, it's good to try to bring an understanding of emptiness into dedication of merit. So we do that by thinking that the merit that we've accumulated is empty of existing inherently. It's merely labeled by the mind. And the I who created the merit is also empty, merely labeled by the mind. And the goal to which we dedicate the merit, enlightenment, is also merely labeled by the mind, empty of existing inherently. And the sentient beings we wish to help reach enlightenment are also all empty of existing inherently and merely labeled by the mind. Okay, thank you very much, and I wish you all the best in your studies, your practice, your life.